What you're seeing now is almost live, maybe just a few minutes. Boris Johnson, the vote is going up on whether or not they will force the government to delay Brexit. Understand, Boris Johnson has staked all his political capital on leaving on October the 31st. Parliament is telling Boris Johnson, you will not be allowed to do that. And this vote, he just lost the vote yesterday. The vote that he lost yesterday was on whether or not Parliament could seize control from the government. They did. Not only did they seize control from Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson lost his majority. Today, they're voting on whether or not to compel the government to do what the government said it will never, under any circumstances, while there is breath in my body, do. And that is whether or not they can force the government to delay Brexit. This vote is taking place now. I'm going to show you the results of this vote. This is what it looks like, a prime minister failing and a government that is collapsing. This is only his third day out. First time at the dispatch box, or second time at the dispatch box, but first major vote. And he's lost that one yesterday. Second major vote is taking place right now. Boris Johnson has lost control of his government. The government that he just took control of. Welcome to the soapbox. You're going to enjoy this. Let's go to hop across the pond. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's watch.
Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Yesterday, Boris Johnson loses his majority. On that same day, Boris Johnson loses control of his government outright. Today, Parliament not just takes control of the government, but Parliament, on its own, passes a motion that says the Prime Minister, regardless of what he wants, we are a democratic institution. We are the longest running parliament that is a democratic institution. And if we tell you to go with hat in hand, you will do just that. Parliament, in this vote, by a decent margin, has just told Boris Johnson to go to Brussels and beg them for an extension of 3 months, if not longer. Boris Johnson, in this moment, is going to call for a snap election. Boris Johnson requires Labor's assistance in order to get that snap election. Labor doesn't want to give that unless they take no deal off the table, because what Boris Johnson can say is, fine, we're going to have an election on December the 5th. Well, that's after Brexit. They don't want to take no deal off the table until that. Let's see what takes place next. Let's keep going. This is now.
Unlocked. Order. Yes. Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken this evening. Yeah. And if the other place passes the bill, then I say to the Prime Minister that this House expects him to uphold the law and to fulfil the obligations that will be placed upon him by this bill and prevent this country from leaving the European Union on the 31st of October without a deal. May I also, Mr. Speaker, thank the clerks for their assistance, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Dorset West and others for their great help. And may I also join my Right Honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, in most warmly applauding the bravery and the courage of many on that side of the House who have stood by their convictions in the national interest.
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the House has now approved the bill as amended, could I press the government to, as rapidly as possible, publish the withdrawal agreement bill, which really does require the proper and robust discussion in this place?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has made his own point in his own way, and it is on the record, and we're indebted to him. Deferred division.
Just to be clear, and I don't mean to kind of chest thump here, but I said going back months ago, there will be a general election. I could not see any other situation where they didn't end up where they are right now. The moment that Theresa May looked like she was going to flame out, which she did, the next prime minister would have zero mandate, zero political clout, especially if that prime minister is named Boris Johnson. And again, I made the point that Parliament doesn't know what it wants, but it knows it doesn't want a no-deal Brexit. Even people who are okay with Brexit. Let's hear Boris Johnson. He's going to give us a response. I would imagine this is a humiliating second day for the new, freshly minted Prime Minister.
Division's motion, the whip to move formally. Thank you. The question is as on the order papers. Most other people say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We now come to the motion on the early parliamentary general election. To move the motion, I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the House of Commons has passed a bill devised by the leader of the opposition, who I see is not in his place, but his colleague. He is characteristically evasive, if not frit, Mr. Speaker. It's a bill that effectively ends the negotiations. A bill that demands an extension at least until next year and perhaps for many more years to come, and a bill that insists Britain acquiesce.
Now, again, I want to point out multiple things are true at once, which is why this politics is so awesome. It is true that Boris Johnson, to some degree, it doesn't make sense to have a negotiation where you close off your ability to leave the negotiation. Meaning, if you don't like the deal, you always need the ability to walk. The argument that Boris Johnson is making here is, I need the ability, I need Parliament to back me on this notion that we will walk if we don't get a deal from the European Union. The problem here is that there have been no negotiations per se, or the negotiations have been a sham. Parliament knows that the negotiations have been a sham. And even though Boris Johnson may need this ability to walk, to even have anything to threaten the European Union with, meaning the European Union doesn't want a no deal falling out of the European Union Brexit. They don't want that. They don't want that 1,000 times. They don't want that. However, they may be willing to accept that depending on the conditions. Britain doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, but they will be willing to accept it under a Boris Johnson depending on the conditions. And he needs that in order to threaten Europe with anything. Meaning, in order for Boris Johnson to have any clout in the political process, he needs to be able to say, if we don't like the deal you give us, we are going to walk. In fact, of the matter is, Boris Johnson is the point. If he's able to get anything done, it's if Europe believes that he is serious about walking. The problem here is he has Theresa May's parliament. Europe knows he has Theresa May's parliament, and he has no capacity to deliver that or deliver on that threat. Meaning, the negotiations are a sham because Europe knows he can't deliver on that particular threat. I hope you understand me. Both of those things are true. It is true that if Boris Johnson had that clout and had Parliament backing him on this notion that we are willing to leave without a deal, The only deal you're going to offer us is Theresa May's, we're willing to walk. If Parliament, if the EU thought he really could deliver on that, they may actually deal with him. He doesn't have the ability to deliver on that threat. So, Europe doesn't negotiate. The negotiations are a sham. Now, it is also true, however, that the public looks at this and says, whoa, there's a level of brinksmanship. We might want to leave. We don't necessarily want to leave with a drunk man off of a cliff, no deal Brexit. That's not what we want. In which case, the public freaks out. And so the public looks at this and says, yeah, you might need that in order to have that negotiation, but that makes the chance of a no deal that much higher, and we're not even certain that you are really negotiating, meaning the chances of a no deal go that much higher. So even though you need that to negotiate, that is not something we are willing to cede to you because of the chances of a no deal Brexit. Both things are true at once. It is true that Johnson needs this. It is also true that it ups the chances of a no deal Brexit, and the public doesn't want it. Johnson, in his case, says, I'm not going to Europe to do that. So I want a general election. What he is doing here is tabling a motion for a general election. This is cutthroat politics. It makes no sense to close off this notion that a parliament or that a prime minister can leave. It only makes sense in the context of a Labour Party that is trying to crash this government. Labour, Corbyn, whatever you want to think of him, is playing cutthroat politics. His goal for the last 3 years has been a general election. That has been his goal. Look back over the last 3 years. And what do you have? Right here, right now, in this moment, a prime minister calling for a general election. 3 years of planning comes and culminates in this one moment. If you want to know what cutthroat, elegant politics looks like, it looks like this.
To the demands of Brussels and hands control to our partners. It's a bill designed to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our history, the 2016 referendum. And it's therefore a bill without precedent in the history of this House, seeking as it does to force the Prime Minister with a pre-drafted letter to surrender in international negotiations. And I refuse to do this, Mr. Speaker, and it's clear that there is therefore only one way forward for the country. The House has voted repeatedly to leave the EU, and yet it has also voted repeatedly to delay actually leaving. It is voted for negotiations, and today, I'm afraid, it has voted to stop, to scupper any serious negotiations. And what this bill means is that Parliament, or the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, who is still not in his place, Mr. Speaker, and I really don't know where he is, he refuses to give battle, or at least to engage in argument tonight. Perhaps that's a sign of how he intends to pursue things in the weeks ahead. The right honourable gentleman's bill. I'm glad he's now favoured the House with his presence, Mr. Speaker. The right honourable gentleman's bill, amongst its other functions, is to take away the right of this country to decide how long it must remain in the EU, and handed that power to the EU. And I'm afraid it is time. That is what it does. And I'm afraid it is time for this country to decide whether that is right. The country must now decide whether the Leader of the Opposition or I go to those negotiations in Brussels on the 17th of October to sort this out, because everybody will know that if the right honourable gentleman were to go there, were to be the Prime Minister, he would beg for an extension. He would accept whatever Brussels demands, and we would then have years more dither and delay, yet more arguments over Brexit, and no resolution to the uncertainty that currently bedevils this country and our economy. And everyone knows by contrast that if I am Prime Minister, I will go to Brussels and I will try to get a deal, and believe me, I know that
Did you hear that? If I am Prime Minister. Why is he using this language? You are Prime Minister. But in his mind, he's already accepted this notion of a general election. Boris Johnson, even when he was running in the race, mentioned this notion of a general election because he knew what I knew. He has no capacity. He has no governing majority at this point. He has no way. He is a weak prime minister. Even Boris Johnson, regardless of what he was saying, ultimately still had Theresa May's government. He had her parliament. He has no governing majority. If he's going to get anything accomplished, he has to go through the public and get the public to co-sign it. Meaning, the public has to go through and say yes or no. 90,000 Tories, as opposed to the country of 66 million people. 90,000 Tories chose him in a country of 66 million people. He has no mandate. And not just has no mandate, he has never gotten elected in the fires of an election from the standpoint of to be in this office, let alone to take the country out of a no-deal Brexit. He has done nothing illegal in this process, so don't misunderstand me. The prorogation is anti-democratic, but it is in no way illegal. Some of the people who are trying to stop the referendum is dramatically anti-democratic, even though they have every right, I suppose, even though it's somewhat gross politics to try to stop a referendum that has already taken place. But that's not the conversation that we're having here. The conversation that we're having is what Brexit, or what type of Brexit do you want? One delivered by a Corbyn or one delivered by a Johnson that could potentially end up in a no-deal situation. What Johnson knows, and I suspect may even politically, even at the point where he got elected, was to some degree planning, was for a general election. He may even want a general election because, again, he has no capacity to deliver the type of Brexit that he wants with Theresa May's parliament. Let's hear him finish.
I can get a deal, but if they, Mr. Speaker, if they won't do a deal, I think it would be eminently sensible for them to do so, and as I say, I believe that they will. Then, under any circumstances, this country will leave the EU on October the 31st. Mr. Speaker, it is completely impossible for government to function if the House of Commons refuses to pass anything that the government proposes. And in my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday the 15th of October, and I invite the right honourable gentleman to respond, to decide which of us goes as Prime Minister to that crucial council on Thursday the 17th of October. I think it's very sad that MPs have voted like this, but if I am still Prime Minister, I do. I think it's a great dereliction of their democratic duty, Mr. Speaker. But if I'm still Prime Minister after Tuesday the 15th of October, then we will leave on the 31st of October with, I hope, a much better deal. The Leader of the Opposition now has a question to answer. He has demanded an election for 2 years while blocking Brexit. He said only 2 days ago that he would support an election. And now, Parliament having passed a bill that destroys the ability of government to negotiate, is he now going to say that the public cannot be allowed an election to decide which of us sorts out this mess? I don't want an election. The public don't want.
The more he says that, the more I disbelieve him. I think Boris Johnson wants an election. Not just do I think he wants an election, needs one. And I think the catch here, maybe the politics of this is, it takes a two-thirds majority in order to make that work. Meaning, in order for him to get the government, the parliament, to enforce or enact the Brexit that he wants, he needs an election. Now, it is also possibly true that he knows that the public is more on board for this notion of a Brexit, of getting out of the European Union, even if it means, I guess my thought is, it's possible that he's looked at polling that show maybe his chances are better, and maybe that he can get his people in that race. And in doing so, he can get the Brexit that he wants. Because he keeps saying it. I don't want an election. I don't want an election. It makes me disbelieve him more and more and more because that's become part of his political mantra at this point. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Corbyn has to have an election because, again, he's been trying to crash the government for, 3 years? Culminates here. What are you going to do, Corbyn? You're going to take him up on this offer and go into this notion of having a general? If you want to take power, here's your chance. You just got to win it.
An election. The country doesn't want an election, but this House has left no other option than letting the public decide who they want as Prime Minister, and I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the second time I've replied to a Conservative Prime Minister seeking to dissolve Parliament to call an election because they didn't have a deliverable Brexit policy. Yeah. Although I'm not condemning the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead by comparing her to a successor, she at least made detailed speeches setting out her Brexit policy, even if we fundamentally disagreed with them. This Prime Minister claims he has a strategy, but he can't tell us what it is. The bigger problem for him...
No, he did tell you what it is. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn knows what his strategy is. I am going to use the sword to pierce myself in the arm because I know that Europe is going to get hit also. Meaning, I am going to injure us and threaten injuring our person because I know injuring our person would also injure Europe. Europe has no want of Britain to fall out of the European Union in a no-deal Brexit, so that is the stick that I'm going to use to threaten Europe by. He's threatening Europe by threatening Britain, by essentially holding a gun to Britain's head with a no-deal Brexit. Says, I will pull this trigger if you don't give me a better deal. That's his political strategy. The catch here is he can't just outright say that because he has to say, I have a deal and all this other stuff, because if he tells the British public that, the British public will freak out. But the British public is already freaking out because they think he's going to take them out in a no-deal Brexit. He doesn't think that they have any negotiations. The negotiation is the no-deal Brexit. Oh, I love this politics. I love the politics. It's awesome. And Corbyn knows this. Corbyn doesn't care. Corbyn's job is to take power. And in this situation, he knows that the Prime Minister can't say what is absolutely and entirely true, that the no-deal Brexit is the negotiation with Europe. You don't want me falling down to the European Union? Give me a better deal. We will do this. We are willing to do this if you don't give us a better deal. Corbyn is like, yeah, I'm going to hit you in the knees on that because the public has no appetite for that. They don't even have any appetite for that level of brinksmanship. And just because you need that brinksmanship to get a deal, I am going to hit you right there. That is your weak spot. That is your sore spot. Or is it? Again, the question becomes, does Boris Johnson actually want a general election because he thinks his chances are better? It doesn't really matter. Corbyn is finally getting what he wants in the sense of a general election.
Is that he hasn't told the EU what it is either. And at Prime Minister's question time today, as with the statement yesterday, he was unable to say whether he's even made any proposals whatsoever to the EU. And it's basically a policy that's cloaked in mystery, like the Emperor's new clothes. There really is absolutely nothing there. And the naked truth is that the reality is deeply unpalatable. A disastrous no-deal Brexit to take us into the arms of a trade deal with Donald Trump that will put America first and Britain a distant second. The Prime Minister knows there is no mandate for no deal, no majority support for it in the country, and no majority for it in this House. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster the co-convener of the Vote Leave campaign, said in March this year, we didn't vote to leave without a deal. Even the leaders of the Leave campaign are absolutely clear that the referendum confirmed no mandate for no deal. No deal. No deal. No deal. No deal is opposed by every business group, every industry body, every trade union, and by this House, as today's votes and others have shown. Mr. Speaker, we want an election because we look forward to turfing this government out. And
Jeremy's lost his place.
Does the Leader of the Opposition want a general election? A yes or no will suffice.
well, he obviously didn't hear what I just said. I was about to point out, before I was gently interrupted by the honourable member, that the offer of the election today is a bit like the offer of an apple to Snow White and the Wicked Queen, because what he's offering is not an apple or even an election, but the poison of a no deal. So, Mr. Speaker,
their concern is that they'll tumble out of the European Union either before the election or before he can get into office. That's their issue. They want him to rule out this notion of a no-deal Brexit in the case of a general election before he accepts a general election.
Speaker, I repeat what I said last night. Let this bill pass and gain royal assent, then we will back an election so we do not crash out with a no-deal exit from the European Union. And so it's the anti-democratic instincts of this government that cause us concern. Despite the expressed will of the House to support the bill debated today, the Conservative peers, their colleagues in the Lords, have tabled 92 amendments for debate. I really doubt this is motivated by a desire to improve the legislation, not a bit of it, but to filibuster it. An undemocratic cabal in Downing Street, aligned with an undemocratic and unelected House to override the democratic will of this House expressed in the bill that we have just given a third reading to. If they can't win the argument, they try to shut down debate. We had the Prime Minister deciding to prorogue Parliament in August, and today he wants to dissolve Parliament to shut down scrutiny. He cannot handle dissent. He cannot handle dissent and debate in his own party, and has extraordinarily expelled 21 of his own MPs who voted against him last night. The hypocrisy of this process is phenomenal. From a Prime Minister who twice voted against the last Prime Minister's Brexit plans. A general election isn't a plaything for a Prime Minister to avoid his obligations.
Let's be clear. Let's not step past that part. Boris Johnson threatened deselection to anybody that voted against him the other night. He voted against his own Prime Minister when he was in her cabinet. Stepped out of her cabinet, like literally attacked his own Prime Minister in this major speech against her. And he deselected these guys. Let's hear him.
To dodge scrutiny or renege on commitments. He is committed to renegotiate Brexit. But where is it? Where is the plan? Where are the proposals? If he has a Brexit plan, be it no deal or the new mystery proposal deal that we've yet to see any information of, then he should put it before the public in a public vote, a referendum or a general election, and seek a mandate for them. Let the Prime Minister go to Brussels tomorrow and ask for an extension so that he can seek a mandate for his unknown Brexit plan and put it before the people. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion from the Prime Minister is about playing a disingenuous game that are unworthy of his office. I look forward to the day his government and his party and all their austerity and misery they've heaped on this country are turfed out of office, and we prevent this country crashing out on the 31st of October with all the damage he knows, because he's already seen the documents, it will do to people's lives and job prospects in this country. It's a cynical movement from a cynical Prime Minister.
So the catch becomes, is Boris Johnson trying to find a way to just crash out of the European Union between the time they can have some kind of election? Again, everything that Corbyn has done up to this point has been for a general election. So it doesn't make sense if he's not necessarily willing to go through with it. The catch becomes, you need to ensure that Johnson doesn't crash out of the European Union between then, and that you get the Brexit that you want, not the Brexit that he wants. Or, in this case, a no-deal Brexit. This is fascinating politics, honestly. Boris Johnson trying to suspend Parliament jumps the shark. Parliament, of course, was going to respond to this. And again, this kind of goes to this notion of, is it possible that Boris Johnson wants a general election because that is the only way he can enforce his political will? By the same token, if Jeremy Corbyn really does want to stop a Tory Brexit, he has to go through this, meaning he has to win in the same way that Johnson has to win. Sanders versus Trump. Love it. It's awesome. Love it. I love it. I love it. British politics has gotten absolutely, entirely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. All right. I will end this because I have a interview with Gordon. And so I will be on Gordon DeMac's channel coming up probably within the next 5 minutes or so whenever he sends me the link. All right, guys. Like and share. This is taking place right now in the UK. Boris Johnson calls for a general election. Boris Johnson loses another vote, loses control of his government. And that government that is freaked out because Boris Johnson seems to be headed for a no-deal Brexit has wrestled control away from that prime minister and is telling him, go and get an extension. He does not want to do that because he staked all of his political capital on not doing that. There is no other way for this to go other than a general election. The only people that are going to sort this out is the public of the UK. But this was true going back for almost 2 years when Theresa May couldn't get her deal through. Corbyn is the point. Theresa May, like it or hate it, at the very least will bring a deal forward. But the truth is, like I said before, the issue with Johnson is he's using the no-deal Brexit as a stick by which to attack the EU with. It's just so happened that stick is going to be used to bash the UK in the head enough where the EU is hurt or bothered or is dealing with unforeseen consequences as a result of the UK's drunk man off of a cliff, no deal, Boris Johnson, Brexit. It's fascinating politics. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.